Imagine a tiny child staring at a marshmallow, knowing they can either eat it now or wait and get to later. This seemingly simple test became one of the most famous psychology experiments ever conducted. In the 1960s, psychologist Walter Mischel at Stanford University decided to study self-control in children. Children were placed alone in a room with a single marshmallow on a table. They were told they could eat it immediately or wait about 15 minutes and be rewarded with a second marshmallow. Some children could not resist. They grabbed the marshmallow and ate it immediately. Others stared, fidgeted, or even covered their eyes, trying to resist the temptation. Psychologists observed every movement, every struggle, meticulously recording how each child coped with delay. The findings were astonishing. Children who were able to wait patiently tended to have better outcomes later in life. Higher academic achievement, improved social skills, and even healthier life choices. This simple test showed a profound truth. The ability to delay gratification is linked to lifelong success. Interestingly, the way children coped with temptation varied widely. Some distracted themselves by singing or talking to themselves. Others tried physical strategies, like covering their eyes or turning away. These tiny acts of resistance or failure, seemingly trivial at the time, predicted patterns of behavior for years to come. The marshmallow experiment reminds us that even in early childhood, the choices we make can echo throughout our lives. And here's something you might not realize. This wasn't just about sweets. It was about impulse, decision-making, and the very foundation of self-control. Psychologists still refer to the Marshmallow Test when studying delayed gratification and behavioral prediction. Even decades later, the experiment continues to spark debates. Is it truly innate self-control, or influenced by environment and trust? And while some may see a simple candy test, the truth is far more complex. It's a mirror reflecting human nature in its purest form. The marshmallow experiment did not end in the 1960s. It evolved over decades as researchers tried to understand why some children waited while others gave in immediately. In later versions, psychologists discovered that the environment played a critical role in a child's decision. If children had previously been rewarded for waiting in other tasks, they were far more likely to wait for the marshmallow. But if promises had been broken before, children quickly learned not to trust the researcher and ate the marshmallow right away. This revealed a surprising insight. What looked like self-control was sometimes actually trust. A child's decision was shaped not only by impulse, but by their belief in whether the world keeps its promises. Researchers also analyzed children's body language during the waiting period. Some children tapped their feet, turned their chairs, or stared at the ceiling to distract themselves. Others smelled the marshmallow, poked it gently, or licked it without technically eating it. These small actions revealed the strategies humans naturally develop to resist temptation. Years later, neuroscientists joined the study and explored how brain activity differed between children who waited and those who did not. They found that the prefrontal cortex, responsible for planning and impulse control, was more active in children who resisted the marshmallow. For those who couldn't wait, the reward processing regions lit up immediately, overpowering rational decision-making. This biological difference suggested that self-control is partly influenced by brain development, not just willpower. In follow-up interviews, many adults who had been part of the original study as children remembered the test vividly. Some laughed about how quickly they ate the marshmallow, while others recalled the intense struggle they felt trying to wait. The experiment became a cultural icon, referenced in films, books, advertisements, and even parenting guides. Its core message, that delaying gratification predicts long-term success, shaped how many people think about discipline and motivation. Yet modern reinterpretations of the experiment emphasize a balanced truth. Self-control matters, but so do stability, trust, and environment. The Marshmallow Experiment remains one of psychology's most fascinating studies because it captures a fundamental struggle shared by every human being. The battle between desire and discipline, delaying immediate pleasure in favor of a greater future reward, is one of the strongest predictors of long-term success. Part 2. The Asch Conformity Experiment, 1951. In 1951, Solomon Asch designed one of the most revealing experiments in social psychology, aiming to uncover how far people would go to fit in with a group, even when the group was clearly wrong. To test this, he brought participants into a room with several actors who had been instructed to give obviously incorrect answers. The participant, unaware of the setup, had to judge the length of lines and state which one matched a reference line. The correct choice was obvious, yet the actors consistently gave wrong answers with complete confidence. Asch observed that many participants began to doubt their own judgment when faced with unanimous group pressure. Even though the task required only simple visual comparison, a significant portion of the subjects conformed to the group at least once. This demonstrated how powerful the desire for social acceptance can be, overriding logic and personal perception. The experiment also revealed two different types of conformity. Some participants genuinely questioned themselves and believed the group might be right, while others knowingly agreed with the incorrect answer, just to avoid standing out. Asch's results exposed a deep human vulnerability. When isolated in a group, people often trade accuracy for belonging. Ultimately, the Asch experiment became a landmark in psychology because it illustrated a universal truth. When everyone else says the same thing, resisting pressure requires extraordinary confidence. It revealed how easily opinions can be shaped by the majority, even when the majority is unquestionably wrong. One lesser-known aspect of Asch's experiment is that participants were often visibly conflicted during the trials. Some laughed nervously, others shifted in their seats, and many showed clear signs of internal struggle as they decided whether to trust their own eyes or follow the group. Asch noted that this discomfort was not trivial. Group pressure produced real psychological tension. Another key detail is that Asch experimented with group size. He found that conformity increased rapidly when the majority consisted of 3 or more people, but adding additional members after that point had little effect. This showed that influence does not require a large group. just a small, unanimous majority. Asch also tested what would happen if even one person in the group gave the correct answer. Remarkably, a single dissenter dramatically reduced conformity levels. Participants felt more confident voicing the truth when they were not the only ones resisting the crowd. This finding highlighted the power of social support. In many situations, one ally is enough to strengthen independent thinking. Interestingly, when participants were allowed to write down their answers instead of saying them aloud, conformity dropped significantly. Without the fear of judgment, people trusted their perception more. This revealed that much of the pressure came not from doubt, but from fear of social evaluation. Even when the crowd is confident, the truth does not change, so trust your judgment before surrendering to the group. Part 3: Stanford Prison Experiment. What happens when ordinary people are placed in positions of absolute power over others? In 1971, psychologist Philip Zimbardo at Stanford University set out to find the answer. He transformed the basement of the psychology building into a mock prison. 24 male college students were selected and randomly assigned as guards or prisoners. Guards were given uniforms, whistles, and rules to enforce. Prisoners were stripped of their personal identity and given numbers instead of names. From the very first day, the situation escalated unexpectedly. Guards began to enforce arbitrary and humiliating rules. Some prisoners became passive, depressed, or even emotionally traumatized. Within days, the experiment spiraled out of control. Zimbardo had to intervene and terminate the study after only 6 days, although it was planned for 2 weeks. The intensity of role-playing revealed dark aspects of human nature. Ordinary people, when given authority without accountability, could act cruelly. The study demonstrated the power of situational forces over personal morals. It shocked psychologists and the public alike, raising ethical debates about experimentation. Prisoners' mental and emotional well-being deteriorated rapidly under constant surveillance and arbitrary punishment. Even some guards exhibited signs of stress and internal conflict, questioning their own actions. The Stanford Prison Experiment remains a stark reminder. Situational dynamics can overwhelm personal ethics. Guards developed elaborate routines to assert dominance over the prisoners. Some invented arbitrary punishments, like cleaning toilets with bare hands or performing humiliating tasks. Prisoners initially resisted, but as days passed, their resistance weakened. Isolation, boredom, and constant monitoring eroded their sense of identity. Some prisoners became so passive that they accepted unfair rules without protest. Emotional breakdowns occurred, with some participants crying uncontrollably or showing extreme anxiety. Zimbardo and his team observed these reactions closely, noting the speed at which ordinary people adapted to assigned roles. Interestingly, some guards expressed guilt but continued their actions due to peer pressure. The experiment illustrated how quickly a structured environment can change behavior. It also highlighted the concept of de-individuation, where individuals lose their sense of personal responsibility when immersed in a group. Even researchers themselves became absorbed in the roles, blurring the line between observation and participation. The environment, rules, and perceived authority transformed ordinary students into agents of oppression. Some prisoners rebelled subtly, refusing orders or creating small acts of defiance. However, these acts were often met with increased punishment and stricter control. Psychologists noted how quickly moral judgments were suspended when participants identified with their roles. The daily routine, monotonous as it seemed, created a psychological environment where cruelty became normalized. The study's early termination after only 6 days underscored the intense psychological impact the environment had on participants. Zimbardo later reflected on how situational pressures can override personality, showing that anyone is capable of harm under the right conditions. The Stanford Prison Experiment remains one of the most compelling demonstrations of the dark side of human nature and authority. As the days passed, the intensity of the interactions between guards and prisoners increased dramatically. Guards devised psychological tactics to break the prisoners' morale. Some introduced rules that made no logical sense, forcing prisoners into confusing or humiliating situations. Prisoners began to internalize their roles, speaking less, avoiding eye contact, and displaying submissive behavior. The emotional toll was visible. Some prisoners cried, begged for leniency, or showed signs of extreme stress. One prisoner even developed a psychosomatic rash, showing how psychological pressure can manifest physically. Meanwhile, guards who initially felt uncomfortable with their power began to adopt the role fully. They enforced arbitrary punishments and began competing for authority, displaying sadistic behaviors. Zimbardo and his team were amazed at how ordinary college students transformed so quickly. The participants' identities blurred. The environment overpowered their personal values. Prisoners started to show signs of learned helplessness, accepting abuse without protest. Some attempted to rebel, creating small acts of defiance, but these were met with swift and harsh consequences. The social dynamics revealed the influence of group conformity and peer pressure within the prison system. Even Zimbardo himself became absorbed in his role as prison superintendent, demonstrating how authority can seduce. After 6 days, the experiment was terminated due to ethical concerns and the extreme psychological stress on participants. The study revealed that situational factors often outweigh individual morality or personality in determining behavior. Ordinary people, when placed in a system with rules and authority, can commit acts they would never consider in normal circumstances. The Stanford Prison Experiment remains a landmark study in social psychology, highlighting the dark potential of human behavior under structured conditions. The key takeaway is clear: power, environment, and social roles can profoundly shape actions, often overriding personal ethics and morality. Part 4. The Milgram Shock Experiment. In the early 1960s, psychologist Stanley Milgram conducted one of the most controversial experiments in social psychology. He wanted to understand how far people would go in obeying authority, even when it conflicted with their personal morals. Participants were told they were part of a study on learning and memory. They were instructed to administer electric shocks to a learner whenever an incorrect answer was given. Unbeknownst to them, the learner was an actor and received no real shocks. The shocks were labeled with increasing voltages, reaching up to 450 volts. As the experiment progressed, the learner pretended to be in pain, pleading for the shocks to stop. Despite hearing screams and cries of discomfort, many participants continued to administer shocks when prompted by the experimenter. The experimenters used phrases like, "Please continue," or "You have no choice, you must go on," to maintain authority. Some participants showed visible signs of stress, sweating, trembling, or nervous laughter. Yet, an astonishing majority continued administering shocks, some up to the maximum voltage. Milgram's goal was to test the tension between obedience to authority and personal conscience. He wanted to see whether ordinary people could commit acts they would normally consider morally wrong. The results were shocking. 65% of participants were willing to administer the highest shocks when prompted. Even when participants expressed concern, they often continued due to the pressure of authority. The experiment demonstrated that situational context could overpower personal morals. Ordinary individuals placed under authoritative command were capable of harming others against their ethical beliefs. Milgram's work ignited widespread debate about ethics in psychological research. The study also provided a chilling insight into real-world atrocities, showing how obedience can lead to destructive behavior. It became a cornerstone for understanding human compliance and the dark side of authority. Even decades later, the Milgram experiment remains a reference point for psychologists studying conformity, obedience, and moral conflict. Participants often showed intense emotional conflict as they obeyed instructions. Many sweat profusely, fidgeted nervously, or muttered apologies under their breath. Some hesitated, glancing at the experimenter for reassurance or permission to stop. Yet, even in moments of visible distress, the authoritative prompts were enough to continue the shocks. Milgram meticulously documented each participant's reaction, noting tension, reluctance, and internal struggle. Interestingly, some participants smiled or laughed nervously, masking discomfort while complying. This experiment highlighted the dangerous potential of blind obedience. Ordinary people, when convinced by authority, could commit acts contrary to their ethical principles. Milgram's work shocked both the scientific community and the public, raising critical questions about human behavior. It revealed that situational pressures, rather than personality traits, often dictate actions. Even highly educated and morally conscious individuals participated in actions they found distressing. The experiment also demonstrated the role of gradual escalation. Participants often started with small shocks, which desensitized them to larger, more harmful voltages. This principle explains how ordinary people can become complicit in harmful systems over time. Many left the experiment visibly shaken, some questioning their own capacity for harm. Milgram later emphasized that understanding obedience is crucial for preventing atrocities in society. This experiment became a benchmark for discussions on ethics, authority, and the human psyche. Even decades later, Milgram's findings serve as a chilling reminder of how ordinary people can commit extraordinary acts under social pressure. The Milgram experiment shows us that moral courage is essential, and critical thinking must prevail when authority commands questionable actions. As the experiment unfolded, participants faced a moral dilemma that tested their very conscience. Many struggled internally, torn between the desire to stop and the pressure to obey instructions. Some participants shook their heads, visibly distressed, yet continued to press the shock button when urged. The experimenter maintained an authoritative presence, rarely allowing participants to question the setup. Milgram noted that the uniform of the experimenter, a lab coat, enhanced the perception of legitimacy. As shocks increased, participants exhibited physical signs of stress: flushed faces, trembling hands, and rapid breathing. Many apologized to the learner, expressing regret, yet they continued when prompted with phrases like, "It is absolutely essential that you continue." The gradual increase in shock intensity created a psychological momentum, making it easier for participants to comply. Some participants exhibited nervous laughter or rationalized their actions, claiming they were just following orders. A few questioned the morality of the experiment, but were reassured by the authority figure that no permanent harm would occur. Interestingly, gender and age did not significantly influence compliance. The tendency to obey was widespread across the participant pool. The experiment also highlighted cognitive dissonance, as participants struggled to reconcile their actions with their self-image. After the session, Milgram debriefed participants, revealing that no real shocks had been administered. Despite this, the emotional impact remained, with many reflecting on their own capacity for obedience. The Milgram experiment revealed that ordinary people could perform acts against their conscience when under perceived authority. It showed the potent influence of situational pressures over individual moral judgment. This study remains a cornerstone in understanding human obedience, compliance, and the potential for ethical compromise. The key takeaway is that authority can compel individuals to act in ways they would normally consider immoral, highlighting the critical importance of moral awareness and critical thinking. Thank you for joining this journey into the hidden corners of human behavior. Remember, understanding these experiments helps us reflect on our own choices and the power of influence around us.